So yesterday I was saying that Jimmy Dore made a good step by leaving the Young Turks and essentially striking out on his own. But the fact of the matter is that in terms of most of his opinions, I don't agree with him almost on anything except for the fact that I'm very non-interventionist as he is. And I would like to see him be honest about who's non-interventionist and who's not. Also, I think that for many years he's been trying to, tear the cover off of a lot of the establishment media. He is a supporter of people like Chris Hedges, who are not really in the establishment media because they got kicked out of it. And I do respect him for it, even though I don't agree with them either. But when he has people like Abby Martin on, who are people that really they engage in their own myth creation, they engage in speculation, they're emotive journalists, they're not really informative journalists. That's really when I start to break with Jimmy Dore, and I'm not going to stop doing it just because he's not with TYT anymore. TYT has become a real joke because they literally sacrificed all their credibility. Jimmy Dore, I think, did a lot of noble work trying to push back against those efforts. But the reality is that in many cases, he's willing to portray himself as this defender of the minorities, as some sort of great, he's a white knight. That's basically how I put it. And he does this in terms of supporting regimes like Venezuela's regime. That's beyond non-interventionism. I'm a non-interventionist. I don't believe in U.S. intervention in South America, whether it's Venezuela or otherwise. But the truth is, if I was to do what he does, which is basically deny all of the problems that are going down in Venezuela and claim that they're all the results of sanctions and imperialism and the empire, that would be just further evidence that I've become a committed ideologue. It's hard. It's hard for me too. Sometimes Donald Trump does things that make me realize that in reality, one person can't be a leader that does every decision correct every time. So this is him having Abby Martin on concerning the Ilhan Omar remarks, and we'll talk a little bit about their reactions and really how their position is also a contradiction in and of itself. And hopefully we'll get through it all.
Ocasio-Cortez attacking the New York Post for responding.
Well, first of all, do you see what the Post did?
Disgusting.
So here's what the New York Post did. It said, Representative Ilhan Omar, 9/11 was some people did something. And here's your something. So do you see what's going on? Like, that's happening. Like, that's gross. But, after 2.5 years of Russiagate pushed by the left, so the whole country's lost their fucking mind. So the whole country. And the only people sane are the people sitting in my garage in Pasadena. So so that happened. And by the way, she's on their side. And here we go.
Omar with this cover. Watch.
Printing on the front page to circulate all around New York City an image that is incredibly upsetting and triggering for New Yorkers that were actually there and were actually in the radius, that woke up one morning or were in their schools and didn't know if they were going to see their parents at the end of the day. To elicit such an image for such a transparently and politically motivated attack on Ilhan, we are getting to the level where this is an incitement of violence against progressive women of color.
And Rashida Tlaib also claiming Omar is being unfairly targeted.
They do this all the time to us, especially women of color. They do that. They take our words out of context because they're afraid, because we speak truth. We speak truth to power. This is just pure racist act by many of those, hateful acts by those, because she does speak truth when it talks about different issues that they don't disagree with. And I'm really outraged.
One of the first people to come out against Omar's comments is Congressman Dan Crenshaw, who lost an eye fighting terrorists in Afghanistan. AOC facing new backlash for this Twitter attack on the decorated war hero, telling him to, quote,
So I want you guys to notice that you can actually hear Abby Martin react to what's going on. She is somebody, if you watch her content, she doesn't have any filter. She's basically the lack of professionalism in her is obvious when you present the news, which is what she used to do on Russia Today, which, I don't blame them for hiring whoever they want to hire. But if you are going to be an emotional wreck all the time, then people have every right to make fun of you. It doesn't matter what the topic is, by the way. The topic could be dead puppies. But if you're going to emotionally present your topic, you're no longer presenting the news, you're presenting opinion.
Go do something about domestic terrorism. Omar also dragging President George W. Bush into the controversy with this tweet. The people and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon. Was Bush downplaying the terrorist attack? What if he was a Muslim? So a lot to unpack here.
So there you go. So that's what's happening. People are pretending she said something she didn't. I'll show you a little bit more. Here's how Morning Joe. So Trump was giving a speech on, and he said this.
Special thanks to Representative Omar of Minnesota.
First of all, he's at the Republican Jewish coalition.
Right.
And he's going to do exactly what he seems to be castigating Ilhan Omar for. Watch this.
Special thanks to Representative Omar of Minnesota. Oh, I forgot. She doesn't like Israel. I forgot. I'm so sorry.
Those sarcastic comments from President Trump about Democratic Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar in front of a conservative Jewish group on Saturday came less than a day after a New York man was charged with threatening her life. The man was charged with threatening to assault and murder a United States official for a phoned-in threat he allegedly made last month. He told investigators that he was a patriot, that he loves the president, and that he hates radical Muslims in our government. This is according to the FBI affidavit. Congresswoman Omar responded to both Trump's attack as well as the death threat leveled against her with a bilingual tweet. "My Lord, forgive my people, for they do not know." Meanwhile, in that same speech, Trump implied dual loyalty by American Jews to Israel, which is incidentally the same anti-Semitic trope for which Congresswoman Omar has been criticized.
I stood with Prime Minister Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu. I stood with your Prime Minister at the White House to recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is something I've been hearing about for a long time.
In response, the American Jewish...
So they're about to claim that that's offensive. Now, I would say it's incorrect. You don't necessarily have to call him your prime minister, call Netanyahu your prime minister. But I've seen actually when Trump had the Irish prime minister at the White House during St. Patrick's Day festivities, which was a little less than a month ago, he was actually kind of joking with the crowd. You know, some of you are Irish, so he's your leader, something like that. So I would say people are misrepresenting what's going on, not just on the Omar side, but also on the Trump side. If it had been so offensive, why was there so much cheering in the crowd?
Jewish committee tweeted, quote, "Mr. President, the Prime Minister of Israel is the leader of his or her country, not ours. Statements to the contrary from staunch friends or harsh critics feed bigotry." Joe.
So did you catch what he said? Trump is talking to a bunch of Jewish people in America, and he says, "You're prime minister." So that's and now they're upset about it.
I just get scared watching this. It just seems so beyond, just far from who we are.
Well, listen. It was like he was Mr. Magoo up there.
No, I mean, he thinks he's a comedian, I think.
No. When he says your prime minister, he's being bigoted. That is, again, the president who actually reveals himself to believe that Jews in America have dual loyalty, and if you are a Jew in the United States of America that your prime minister must be Benjamin Netanyahu. That is wildly offensive. And again, it is the same sort of anti-Semitic trope that many Republicans were attacking Congresswoman Omar for. And Tom Nichols, feel free to talk about that, but also here's yet another example of the President of the United States inspiring his supporters to threaten politicians, to threaten members of the press, to threaten people on the president's enemies list.
What about Julian Assange? What about that? Putting a journalist? He's not just threatening; they're actually arresting. Okay, so let me just get your reaction to this, Abby.
My blood is boiling. That's my reaction. I mean, this is a fascist incitement to violence, as well as Trump tweeting out that video.
Yeah, Trump tweeted out a video of spliced together of her words and the planes going into the building and stuff. I didn't show it, but that happened.
It's pretty disturbing, Jimmy. I mean, Joe Scarborough was right. The first time I've actually seen him talk, he was right. I mean, it is an anti-Semitic trope to actually conflate Judaism with Israel in any sense of the word. And so that is really...
No, it's not an anti-Semitic trope to conflate. The idea that those two are mutually exclusive concepts is pretty retarded. Okay, to say that, well, to conflate Israel, a country where the majority of the population is Jewish, with Jewish people, to say that that is an anti-Semitic trope is ridiculous. That would be like claiming that conflating India with Hinduism, which is the majority religion over there, is an anti-Hindu trope. Or to say that conflating Iran, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran, with Islam is an Islamophobic trope. No, you have to associate. Word association does not make something racist. Okay. Now, if you want to argue the substance of what he said, yeah, you can make the case that not every person who's Jewish believes that Benjamin Netanyahu is their prime minister or whatever you want to call it. Maybe Benjamin Netanyahu views himself as the prime minister of all the Jewish people. That doesn't make it so. So what they're doing here is arguing a lot of semantics when it suits them. So let's think about that for a second. They are substantiating the words of Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, the two idiots on MSNBC that for 2 years were willing to let literally every crazy Russia conspiracist onto the show. They've had Malcolm Nance. They had that idiot Michael Wolff, who came in and basically claimed that Nikki Haley was having an affair with Donald Trump. That's who they're trying to basically agree with, because he happened this morning it happened to be that Morning Joe found this offensive, that Trump was sparring with Ilhan Omar.
Good that they made that distinction and said this is anti-Semitic, actually, to say that Jewish people by default should not only support Israel, but then refer to Netanyahu as their prime minister. So
after Trump tweeted out that video and all that stuff, Nancy Pelosi tweeted this out. She says, the memory of 9/11 is sacred ground, and any discussion of it must be done with reverence. The president shouldn't use the painful images of 9/11 for a political attack. So that misses the mark. Here's what Ian Higgins says. He says, a statement that implies once again that the central point of the attack is fair. The problem is in the delivery.
Right.
That's what Nancy Pelosi is saying. Yeah, we all agree Ilhan Omar's wrong. That's a good point he's making. But he shouldn't use 9/11 to... We should find another underhanded way to shit on Ilhan Omar. That's what Nancy Pelosi's saying,
this
right?
mealy-mouthed, weak-ass comment from Nancy Pelosi epitomizes everything that's fucking wrong with the Democratic Party right there, in a nutshell.
Yep.
This is the best she can do. This is the best you can muster when there is an entire party facilitating the murder of a sitting congressperson.
Yep. Because she'd rather have Trump as president than Ilhan Omar fucking bugging her in the Congress. That's why. Because Ilhan Omar is way to the left of Nancy Pelosi, and she's much more comfortable working with Trump than she is with Ilhan Omar. That's why.
So let me put a pause there. It's hard to pick a good side in this conflict. It really is a bunch of dick wagging on either side. Look, I think that the result of 9/11 was negative for the majority of the country. For the day after 9/11, a lot of people say that was the best day for Americans. Not September 12th was the best day because suddenly we were a single country. We were a single people, and we had a union of purpose. And it didn't stay that way. And in many cases, people started to doubt really the implications of 9/11, especially once the Iraq War began. And I would say a lot of the people who did have the unity of purpose on 9/12, they were responsible for ruining that unity of purpose by invoking it in order to go to war with Iraq. So I think that's where me and Jimmy Dore and Abby Martin start to diverge in our opinions. Because the fact is that Nancy Pelosi was already serving in Congress during 9/11. She was in Washington while the Pentagon was under attack. And while Nancy Pelosi in general is a pretty ridiculous person, she has a little more standing to talk about it than does Ilhan Omar. Now, was her she was using this as a rebuttal to Donald Trump, and for them, for Jimmy Dore, Abby Martin, and Ian Higgins, it's not enough. You have to condemn him the whole way because apparently the sacred ground of 9/11 is off limits for Donald Trump, but it's not off limits for Abby Martin, who essentially parsed the words that said, for example, some people did something. Okay, so I think what she was trying to do was make this into an issue that 9/11 wasn't the central problem. The reaction to 9/11 was worse than the attacks themselves. Okay, that I would say is not that's not really making a real point. Because isn't their point that 9/11 was a reaction to something else? Also, the fact of the matter is that CARE, which she said was founded after 9/11, was founded in 1994. I can actually branch. It says right here, CARE was founded in 1994 in response to growing anti-Muslim discrimination and Islamophobia across the nation. At themselves, the innocent targets of prejudice and hate, and the need for an organization that could speak to the unique position of Muslims in America became apparent. So, yeah, I think that, whatever one thinks of CARE, and I have my own thoughts on CARE, but that's not the issue here. CARE itself also admits that it was not founded as a reaction to 9/11. It's more than likely it was founded after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which was done with a Ryder truck that was carried out by Ramzi Youssef, who was a Kuwaiti terrorist who was for sure a member of Al-Qaeda. In fact, he lives to this day. He is in prison in Colorado. So let's see some more of this.
I liked how you brought up that she is speaking about her experience as a Muslim. I mean, It would be the same as a Christian person saying, yeah, I mean, the Christchurch massacre or one of these massacres of Muslims that's happened in the last couple, years. If they said, yeah, some people did something there and now we got all of our civil liberties taken away.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so...
So is she trying to say, she doesn't actually believe this, because if she did, she would start speaking out against the fact that in New Zealand, the government is suddenly trying to confiscate people's weapons, even though the person who committed the shooting was not a New Zealander. He was an Australian. So again, these are people being selective about the message they want to hear. And it gets worse.
Disingenuous, and it's also just shocking that here we are 20 years after 9.
So you can see that the whole time she is being extremely emotional. 20 years after 9/11. Look, I lived through 9/11 too. I was in school that day. I'm not crying here. I am talking about the subject maturely, like a person who hasn't lost their puppy down the drain.
9/11, and it really feels like the Islamophobia is as bad, if not worse.
That's because it makes a lot of money for the military-industrial complex. That's why, and and the same people fund the news media, and that's why we're living in what's happening right now. That's why we're bombing 8 different countries, turning Libya into a failed state. Half the country wants to go into Venezuela, and people hate Tulsi Gabbard for telling the truth about our wars. Of course, you tell the truth, you get in.
Hold on a second. These are things that I don't have really arguments about with Jimmy Dore. This, the Assange issue, there are many places where you can find common ground, regardless of whether you're a progressive or a libertarian, regarding war and peace.
Trouble. I found that out with Russiagate. Friend of the show, Jake Flores, says liberals went from "she gets the hijab done" to I will not defend Ilhan Omar from a death threat issued by the president in like 6 months.
So yeah, that was not a death threat. Tweeting a video of her talking about a video or talking about an event juxtaposed on the video of the event, that's not a death threat. I'll tell you what a death threat was. Now, I'm not denying that she herself was targeted by a threat, but back in 2017, there was a threat that was actually carried out by a supporter of the Bernie Sanders campaign, James Hodgkinson. This is something that the Jimmy Dore show never really addressed, and a number of people were wounded, and one of them very seriously, Steve Scalise, who's a Republican member of Congress. Now, at the time, there was no talk of, why is the liberal media inciting violence against white guys, against Republicans, against whatever. And again, I want to remind you, the Republican Party, as far as I'm concerned, is just as much of an establishment organization as the Democrats are. So there's a lot of selective outrage here. When you had people who were chasing Sarah Sanders out of her restaurant, people chasing Ted Cruz out of a restaurant, people chasing actual, Republican members of the elected officials, things like that, and there were actual members of the Senate whose addresses and phone numbers were doxed by Democratic radical staff members of the Senate. Well, at that time, Jimmy Dore wasn't really anywhere to be found. He apparently found more important things to talk about. But now that you have Ilhan Omar to care, who is basically, she's not really on board with a lot of the progressive commitments that people like Jimmy Dore are talking about. And I'll tell you another thing. So you have that issue of Ilhan Omar talking about, 9/11 and some people did something. Well, Abby Martin has said Trump's Syria withdrawal is a deception. Let's hear some of that.
Obviously, reining back the U.S. empire anywhere and removing troops anywhere is a good thing. So it's really been quite atrocious to see the Democratic Party establishment working with most of the GOP and Pentagon to attack this decision from the right, decrying any troop withdrawal as dangerous for so-called national interests.
Donald's right. I agree with him, Putin. Imagine that is the comment of Vladimir Putin on the actions taken by the President of the United States in relationship to Syria. An action that was taken without the benefit of the thinking of our national security establishment, a decision that is dangerous, and a decision that is a Christmas present to Vladimir Putin.
It's amplified the claim by liberal pundits, journalists, and Democratic Party leaders like Hillary Clinton that Trump is some kind of isolationist who wants to rein back America's expansive military machine. So what is going on here? Is Trump really curtailing the U.S. empire and pushing back against the military-industrial complex that has dominated U.S. foreign policy since World War II? No. In fact, this couldn't be further from the truth. Like in Afghanistan, Trump is simply removing the troops he himself added since taking office. While Trump railed against Obama for putting U.S. troops in Syria, he left office with less than 300 U.S. troops there. But through 2017, that number grew to around 2,200 today, approaching 10 times the amount under Obama. But it's hard to know the true number since Trump broke with Pentagon policy and actually stopped disclosing troop deployments to Syria and Iraq. How democratic. And while I was the first to call Obama the drone king, Trump has drastically ramped up U.S. bombing in every region of the world, along with a massive amount of civilian casualties. Not too surprising, considering he campaigned on a new major war to not only bomb the shit out of alleged terrorists, but their families too.
I'm Donald Trump, candidate for president, and I approve this message. We'll build a wall on the southern border, and yes, I will also quickly and decisively bomb the hell out of ISIS. I'm going to bomb the shit out of them. It's true. I don't.
All right, so she basically thinks that Trump is insincere about his commitment not to be an intervener in Syria. And, you know, the point is well taken, but the fact is that Trump committed to defeating ISIS, and he has accomplished it. And in many, you know, to the large degree, he's already withdrawn a lot of these troops, and hopefully he'll withdraw the rest. Unfortunately, you know, I think that she's correct in being skeptical as to whether he will withdraw all of them. But she is basically, Abby Martin, like, what she does is she straddles a very fine line. On the one hand, Donald Trump is an evil, warmongering neocon. On the other hand, she generally rejects the Russiagate hysteria, the same as Jimmy Dore. So the fact is, why is she standing up for somebody? This is from Alpha News in Minneapolis. Ilhan Omar said that she would vote to impeach the tyrant Trump. And she said, so candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives and State Representative Ilhan Omar is ready to vote to impeach President Donald Trump, saying she recognizes him as a tyrant. Omar joined congressional hopeful Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in an interview on CNN's The Van Jones Show. When asked by host Van Jones whether she would vote in favor of impeaching Trump if elected to office, Omar did not hesitate to voice her support. Omar claimed this is the tip of the iceberg of just how destructive the president is. I would vote yes, Omar said. I think when we're looking at the kind of nation I feel I believed in, the kind of nation I heard about 22 years ago in that refugee camp, and the kind of hesitancy that really should exist, I feel that we're just even seeing the tip of the iceberg of just how destructive the president is. I recognize him as a tyrant. I recognize him as someone who has developed tendencies of dictatorship, Omar added. Omar said the Democrats are not running to try to undo the 2016 election, but are running to save our nation from destruction. Now, let's be clear about that. You can't just impeach someone for crimes that have nothing to do with it. It said Ocasio-Cortez, who was there, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, echoed Omar's plans to vote to impeach Trump, saying she believes the president has committed a crime, alleging an infringement of the Emoluments Clause and a violation of campaign finance laws. Ocasio-Cortez claimed that there are many different ways to reach the conclusion that Trump needs to be impeached. The point is not whether you can find ways to reach the conclusion. The fact is that the problem is, can you prove that he deserves to be impeached? And neither of these people are making that case. One of them is claiming that he has become a tyrant. If he's become such a tyrant, how did both of you get elected the same year? And yet you say that, and this is the same contradiction you see all the time in the press. They claim that Trump is becoming a dictator, yet constantly Congress stifles a lot of his plans, whether it's the Republicans not supporting his wall budget, whether it's the Democrats not supporting his wall budget, whether it's the Democrats threatening to impeach him all the time, whether it's Democratic committees that seem to be drawing subpoenas for all sorts of people in his personal orbit. That is really the contradiction there. You can't call somebody a tyrant when you basically have free reign to investigate a lot of the things about him and to criticize him on TV and earn spots on CNN and all sorts of networks like that. That's not what tyranny is. It's now, if you want to criticize certain aspects of his personality, well, feel free to fire away, but that's not really a substantive argument about impeachment. And another thing that I want to bring up. So what Ilhan Omar has actually said about the Assad regime, which is the regime that both Jimmy Dore and Abby Martin have been saying is a legitimate government of Syria. And, you know, I'm not calling for intervention in Syria, but they can't agree with Ilhan Omar, therefore. She says that Syria's Assad has become an icon of the far right in America. And here in Counterpunch, which is a very far left source, a very pro-Palestinian source, it says on Ilhan Omar, Assad fetishism and the danger of red-brown imperialism. They basically talk a lot about how she tweeted out something that said, now in a sane world, the tweet would be interpreted as fairly innocuous, a short statement on the anniversary of protests in Syria, which eventually, let me see here, where's the tweet itself? I think they deleted it. However, when dealing with Assad fetishists, that online community of people from left and right who glorify Assad as an individual and leader of anti-imperialist resistance, even a simple statement such as Omar's is taken as de facto evidence of collaboration with the CIA, MI6, Mossad, et al. Take, for example, Maram Sousli, the partisan girl, who is one of the most prominent Mossad fetishists and an unabashed racist and fascist. Her response to Omar's tweet read, Ilhan, you claim to oppose AIPAC, but on Syria, you're in lockstep with them. So this is the tweet itself. It says, the people of Syria revolted against Assad's repressive dictatorship 8 years ago today, demanding a more just and free government. Peace-loving people around the world stand in solidarity with them in this struggle. And then this person even says, I stood with you on a free Palestine. Now you're lying. You know you're lying, and you were probably paid to take this position. I've lost all respect for you now. You voted for H.R. 1 that hurts third parties, H.R. 21, which promotes democracy in Venezuela for $20 million. You're a fraud. WikiLeaks Clinton email, Omar isn't a true Palestinian. So some people are taking this way too far. She's an Israeli agenda pawn. Denounce your support for her. She's a sleight of hand and tongue Democrat like the rest. She's co-opted. No, she never claimed to be a Palestinian. That's one thing that you can't peg on her. She's Somali. She's Somali, dude. She's Somali. So some people are so fanatical in their beliefs that they'll basically jump onto anybody that they deem to be deviating from it. And the same thing has happened with Ocasio-Cortez. The same thing has happened with a lot of people who run afoul of the pro-Palestinian activist organizations. So one further thing that I'd like to say about Abby Martin. Okay, we'll get to this in a second. But this is her in 2008 talking about 9/11.
Was 9/11 an inside job?
Absolutely it was.
How do you know that?
I know that because I've researched it for 3 years, and every single thing that I uncovered solidifies my belief that it was an inside job and that our government was complicit in what happened.
What was the first piece of evidence that you found 3 years ago?
The first piece of evidence that I found, I saw the Pentagon, which confused me, and then I just started researching more. I saw Building 7, and then I saw the demolition of the two towers right in front of your eyes. It's really just, it's someone telling you that an apple is an orange, and it's just, you have to just trust your own mind to know what you're seeing is true.
So what's the most compelling evidence to you that 9/11 was an inside job?
Absolutely Building 7 without a shadow of a doubt.
Building 7.
Building 7, no doubt in my mind. Building 7 is brought down by controlled demolition. Anyone who looks at it can see that. It's so clear. It's like black and white. I mean, no one can look at that building and say that that was brought down by fire. There's nothing there. There's no debris. Even the Twin Towers, you look at ground zero, there's nothing there. There's just powder. Where do these huge 110-story buildings go? It's just shocking. And the fact that they did it in broad daylight, it really is infuriating. And the people can't see it because, like the Nazi propaganda said, it's a lie so big that people can't see it. They can't believe it because it's so big and it's so in your face.
So is that why you're here today? To let people know?
I am here. I've been a 9/11 Truth activist for 3 years because I feel like it's the most important issue to expose. They don't want any evidence to be uncovered about 9/11 Truth, because that would ruin their whole system. You know, they have everyone under this grid watching TV like zombies, believing everything they see on television. So if they let one piece of evidence slip out, then that could ruin their whole grid. My name's Abby Martin. I'm the organizer of the San Diego 9/11 Truth Meetup.
Oh, great.
What's your name?
My name's Jock Doubleday. How are you?
Okay, so that was Abby Martin in 2008 under the Bush administration. And look, I'm not going to get into the 9/11 Truth movement. I honestly have not studied the issue. Okay, so if you're a member of that movement, I am not trying to get into a fight over 9/11 Truth and these theories because I honestly, it's not my it's not my area. Okay, what I'm trying to say is that Abby Martin, of all the people to claim that, oh, it's Islamophobia, it's about rousing, you know, this is a person who later in 2014, when she was basically being pushed out at RT because she was criticizing the Crimea invasion, She put this on 911blogger.com. She said, I just wanted to write a note considering the recent hack smear campaign against me for my radical roots in this movement. I stand by my grassroots activism and will never apologize for my past, which has gotten me to where I am today. Unfortunately, publications like the New York Times, Raw Story, and media turned the story into the fact that I was a lunatic because I dared to question 9/11, the event used to get us into the never-ending war on terror. They embedded an angst-ridden video of me at a rally during college, making comments that I do not stand by today. I also gave a statement in response that I do not think the attacks were an inside job. She says, I also gave a statement in response that I do not think the attacks were a, quote, inside job. Okay, so she was so convinced in 2008. She'd seen all the evidence she needed to know. She was so locked down on it. She was basically willing to hold rallies and organize an entire group of people in San Diego to do it. And yet now, apparently, she's walking away from that and claiming she does not think that the attacks were an inside job. So then she says, the language here is used as a discrediting factor, and it's irresponsible to assert such an unknowable claim. I distanced myself from that language years ago. However, I maintain the fact that we were lied to, as do many victims' family members, government officials, commission members, and world citizens. No argument about that. And as all of you know, I have never strayed from calling out the many inconsistencies in the official story, as well as the cover-up, and I will continue to do so on my platform, wherever that may be. A, quote, truther on this issue is nothing to be ashamed of. Keep fighting, Abby. So, people started to, get up on her, and she says, although I think the matter of what happened on 9/11 is important to Abby Martin, I sense that career interests have taken precedent at this time and that retreating from her previously espoused views is a, quote, career move. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize, but that is how things appear to be at this point. Saying that 9/11 wasn't an inside job seems to say that there was not even a possibility of official complicity in the attack. If Martin believes there is no possibility of official complicity in the event, she should say so more clearly. Retreating from her previous 9/11 views to a degree sufficient enough to preserve future career opportunities may require burning the bridges that brought her to this point in the first place. If becoming a controlled mouthpiece for a TV network is more important than speaking one's honest opinion, so be it. At this point, Martin seems to be playing both sides of the fence in order to facilitate her career. Now let's go down to this one. It says, I, for one, am proud to march alongside you in the 2008 march in Santa Monica and others. The movement will never see those numbers again now, 12 years after the attack. The videos should not have been removed. It should stand as a matter of historical record. I was glad to see that it was reposted elsewhere a few hours later, not by me. I watched it again, and you have nothing to be ashamed of. Now, I will stop before I give you a schooling on Sandy Hook, Boston, and Aurora, and maybe even the Pentagon. I always believed one of the importance of 9/11 truth was to expose false flag terror in order to prevent the next one. And then it says, I like you, Abby, and I know I'm going to get shit for this, but my heart is pounding as I write this, but it's the truth. And then Abby Martin responds, a video wasn't uploaded from my account, but it contained very strong assertions that I do not stand by today. I'm happy it was taken down. There's plenty of other things for the historical record regarding my thoughts about the official story. I thank you for all your support during this insane time in my life. And then people are agreeing with the other person, with Aiden. And, Abby Martin, she walked away from it. She walked away from it, and this is, like, people started to really, get into this here. And I'm not going to litigate this. If you're a 9/11 truther, you can reply, put whatever you want. It's fine. I don't really have an objection to people putting their theories out there. It's not my problem. Just try not to get me banned. I only care if you I don't care if you get banned. I'm not going to try to get you banned, but just don't get me banned. But in any case, this is the truth. Abby Martin used 9/11 in order to propel her career to a certain point, and then she changed her mind when it did become socially acceptable to talk about how it was an inside job and the government took down the Twin Towers. If you want to believe in something like that, you have to go all the way, or at least explain what changed your mind. She never did that. That's one of the reasons that Abby Martin is basically a liar and she's a snake. And unfortunately, Jimmy Dore, she has his ear. That's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also, subscribe to me on BitChute at Chef Leopard, on Minds also at Chef Leopard, and on Gab at Starscream85. And I will talk to you later. Have a great rest of your Sunday.